Hello and welcome to Lesson 5 of Resources and Energy Resource Management. This is the first session where we really focus on energy resources specifically. So this would be the second part of the paper with regards to that topic anyway. So today we're going to be looking at something which I hope is fairly familiar to you from maybe primary school or even science lessons at high school, and that's renewable and non-renewable energy. So by the end of today's session, you should hopefully know the difference between renewable and non-renewable energy, and give examples of each, but also very specifically you need a fairly detailed example of one specific non-renewable energy source and one specific renewable energy source, and I'm going to provide you with lots of detail about each of those. So write today's title and learning objectives down. When you're ready, unpause the screen and we'll get started. So this is something which I believe you probably have a decent idea of, and we've already looked at this actually, because the very first lesson we looked at classifying resources, and one of the ways we classify resources, particularly with energy, was whether they were renewable or non-renewable. So you should already have these definitions in your notes, but I'm interested to see whether you can remember these definitions. So pause the screen and try and just say out loud, don't write it down necessarily unless you really want to, a definition for renewable and non-renewable energy. I even made you answer an exam question where you had to compare the two. Okay, so renewable energy, it can be reused, will not run out. They're potentially inexhaustible, can be naturally replenished in a short time scale. Whereas non-renewable energy is finite, it will run out, it cannot be remade because it takes millions of years to form. Hopefully that's something which you're able to do. Remember, the early questions in any topic, in any part of the exam paper, are always around key terms, always around knowledge, about basic knowledge, state or define non-renewable energy, or pick out the example of non-renewable energy from this list of 4, wherever it might be. And so to help you practice that, the next slides are going to be asking you to sort different types of energy into whether they are renewable or non-renewable. So this table might help. Okay, 2 little headings just in your book, and then so we'll copy the table out, and then I'm going to show you a list of energy types, and you are going to have to put them into whether they are renewable or non-renewable. So get your table sorted, and when you're ready, unpause the screen and I'll give you the list. Okay, so here's the list. You've got geothermal, natural gas, tidal, oil, wind, hydroelectric power, solar, biofuel, coal, and wave. Write those into your table where you believe they belong, either renewable or non-renewable. Pause the screen while you do it. It should take you a couple of minutes, and when you're ready, unpause, please. So, how did you do? Well, let's have a little look. On the renewable side, you should have written wind, hydroelectric power, wave, tidal, solar, geothermal, and biofuel. And on the non-renewable side, you just wanted 3: coal, oil, natural gas. Now, I'm going to raise a point here early on. In an exam question that has gone since and been passed, this was a question where they were given, pupils were given 4 options of renewable energies, or it was different types of energy, and it asked them to pick out the renewable energy source. So it gave them a list, and on that list was like wind, let's say I think wind it was, coal, oil, and natural gas. Now some pupils, and believe it or not more than I was hoping, picked natural gas as the renewable energy source. Now you might think, oh, that's crazy, but it depends on the order that they appear, because if the exam board put natural gas as the first option, then coal and oil, and then wind, people will look at the word natural and they associate natural with renewable, because it's seen as renewable energy is seen as more eco-friendly, good for the environment, etc. Natural gas is just gas. We always say coal, oil, gas. Natural gas is just the other way that they would present gas to you in an exam paper. Please do not be fooled by that word natural, whereas some pupils have. If that's the option, look at all 4 of the options and recognise straight away wind, that's the only renewable resource there. Okay, that's just worthwhile pointing out. There is one type of energy that's notable by its absence, and that's nuclear. And there is a question mark about nuclear energy, and depends on who you ask whether they would class it as renewable or non-renewable. Personally, I'd say it's a non-renewable energy source, but some people argue that it should belong in the renewable category. What I am saying to you is play it safe. If you ever get a question about renewable or non-renewable energy, just ignore nuclear. Pretend it doesn't exist. And if you get a specific question about nuclear, you can't ignore it. But you're much safer saying, oh, what's an example of renewable energy? Don't say nuclear, say wind or solar or tidal, something obvious. If you get asked to give an example about non-renewable energy, again, don't say nuclear, say coal, oil, or natural gas. Nuclear, because it's under slight debate, there's question marks over whether it would be something that can create a bit of confusion for the examiner. So we'll ignore that one. And actually, in an exam board recently, they gave nuclear as the answer for both a renewable and a non-renewable acceptable answer because they see it as both potentially. So it's annoying and ignore it. Sometimes scientists classify it as renewable because the amount of energy it provides for a small amount of material suggests that really the amount of uranium there is on the Earth is sufficient to last us for thousands of years. And it produces little CO2, which again is another characteristic of renewable energy. However, uranium is still a finite resource, and if we all move to nuclear in the world, which we won't do, but if we all did, then we'd soon find that uranium is running low and running out, and it produces waste material which takes literally thousands if not millions of years to degrade and become sort of safe. So that would be sort of very non-renewable characteristics, and that's why again there's a bit of debate about it. Worthwhile maybe writing this down about nuclear energy, and the reason being, just in case it does come up in an exam. But I think try and avoid it if you can, and if you can't avoid it, you probably will get the mark anyway because it's debated. Right, so while you're writing those notes, pause the screen, and when you're ready, unpause the screen, and we'll go into more detail about one specific type of non-renewable energy, followed by one specific type of renewable energy. Okay, so we're going to start with the non-renewable energy resource, and you need to know, and the exam board specify this, so we can't just ignore it. You need to know about the production and development of one non-renewable energy source in detail. Now, we have decided to use coal, and the reason we've decided to use coal is because it's in the revision guide for the exam board, it's on Seneca, it's the one that is most commonly used in the book as well. So there's a lot of resources that you can use if you wanted to top up your knowledge or extend your knowledge. So the background to coal is that it's been a very, very important world energy source, and it still remains very important to some nations. During the Industrial Revolution, it was absolutely critical to the development of the United Kingdom, and it provides around 30% of the energy needs all over the world, so it's still a big player. And in 2014, there was actually, believe it or not, a rise. Even though we know that coal is running out and we know that it's not very good for the environment, there was actually a rise in the consumption of coal by about 4%. But there was 7% decline in production, which seems a bit strange. Like that, that essentially less coal was being mined, but we were using more of it. Now, there's reasons for that. It might be that essentially we've mined as much as we can, or we're getting there, and we're just kind of using up the coal that we've already got stockpiled somewhere. Or it might just be that we are better at utilising coal, or better at getting coal from the ground in other ways, or something. It might just be a result of us having more energy consumption overall. So not only are we using more coal, but actually we're using more of everything. So we're just utilising the coal we've got as well as developing solar and wind and nuclear and whatever. And fossil fuels, just to, again, more background information about what coal is. It is a fossil, technically. Coal is formed by tropical plants that died millions of years ago during what they call the Carboniferous period. And that's why it's called the Carboniferous period, because coal and oil, which were formed during that period, are predominantly carbon. So they store carbon, and when they burn and they combine with oxygen through combustion, they create carbon dioxide, and that's why coal is such a big deal, because that carbon dioxide we know is a greenhouse gas which is causing the enhanced greenhouse effect, global warming, climate change, etc. So coal is again stored carbon from millions of years ago when effectively forests couldn't decay quick enough, but to kind of allow for the next layer to go on there. So essentially they fossilized and they created this pretty much carbon resource that we've dug out of the ground ever since. Coal energy is used to create electricity, to power many of our appliances at home. And the way that we use coal is we burn it because it's the energy that carbon releases that we're interested in, because that energy creates heat, and heat we can use to boil water, to turn to gas, to steam, to generate electricity through turning turbines. And that's how pretty much most energy works, turning a turbine. If you can use the wind directly to turn a turbine, great. If you can use the power of steam, fine. If you want to use waves to turn turbines, again, brilliant. But effectively, to make electricity, you turn a turbine of some description. The reason coal is so good is because it can actually burn very hot, and it can turn, and steam can be very, very powerful. It can be really well directed, and therefore it can turn many, many turbines, and even add resistance to the turbine to generate more electricity. So coal is something which creates electricity and has done for many, many years, and lots of power stations around the world are set up literally just to burn coal, to burn fossil fuels in order to generate that electricity, and changing them would cost billions. So on the next slide is a table which it says copy and complete. I would recommend reading through, maybe taking a screenshot and just adding the information to the gaps. Alright, this is also available as a handout ready-made on Office 365 in the Job Vlogs folder, but again, if you want a screenshot while I'm talking, then that's fine too. So once you've got this information down, which is just background to coal, where it's come from, how much we use, etc., then, and made sure you've got those in your notes, then the next thing is a table you can cut and stick in. Okay, so here's the table. There are hints to help you with regards to this. I've given you the first letter, but this is a summary of the advantages and disadvantages of coal as an energy resource, because there are many advantages to it, but we're more aware of the disadvantages because the impact it's having on the environment. So copy and complete this, please. You fill in the gaps. Pause the screen while you do it, and when you're ready, unpause the screen and I'll go through the answers. Okay, so here are the answers. There are still large quantities of coal available in 70 countries worldwide, and they should last for about another 200 years. Coal mining is cheap, it's easy, it generates large amounts of electricity, it generates large numbers of jobs, and it's not weather dependent, unlike solar and wind. Disadvantages, however: it produces greenhouse gases. It's very dangerous to mine. It leads to deaths because of mine collapses, things like black lung, coal dust, all sorts of problems. The equipment used is large and noisy, affects wildlife. Open cast mining just decimates wildlife habitats. It just, strips away the land. And even though there are 200 years of coal, as a human race, we want to live for longer than 200 years. So the stocks are limited, and if we get rid of them, which we're projected to within the next 200 years, then we are going to have to try and solve the resource by filling in the gap some other way. So it makes sense to start exploring other options now before we run out first. So make sure your table is correct. Again, if you need to do any extra stuff, please just pause the screen. You're under no rush whatsoever because you're doing this from home, and then we will look at how we could apply this information about coal. So you've got lots of background information about coal, and you've also got lots of advantages and disadvantages. I want you to be able to apply this now to a bit of exam question practice. So outline questions, they're horrible. All right, they're a bit like an explain question, but if you see the word outline, you think explain, but think I'm going to have to explain and extend something more than once. And these are very, very common questions that you'll come in exam. There's always about 2 or 3 in every exam series, and these are the ones that I find more tricky, because the way to answer them, although it is very structured, very definite, it requires you to just go on and on and on about the same point. So here we go. We've got an example, and I'll model up for you. It says outline one advantage of a non-renewable energy source for 3 marks. Now I'm going to dissect this for you. Outline is like explain, so you're going to have to give reasons, you're going to have to use connectives, and it's one thing. one thing we're going to have to outline, but for 3 marks. So that one thing, which is an advantage of non-renewable energy source, coal, one advantage of coal, I've not just got to say what an advantage is, I've got to then expand upon that and tell me why that's so good. So, to give you a bit of a hint, or not a hint, I'm just going to tell you, the mining of coal is cheap. That is one advantage, worth a mark. We've now got to try and get the extra 2 marks. We can't just start listing other things that are good. Mining of coal is cheap. Mining of coal is easy. Mining of coal is produces large amounts of energy. They're 3 separate advantages, not one. So we need to just focus on this being cheap and then take that further. So if mining of coal is cheap, what does that mean? Well, it means the electricity produced is less expensive. So mining of coal is cheap, so the energy that's produced is cheaper too. That's a second mark. That still links to the fact that coal is cheap. Coal is cheap, therefore the energy is less expensive. Now what does that do? Well, it lowers the cost to the people buying the energy. So that's great for people on lower incomes. And there you go, 3 points made about the coal being short, 2 extra points. So coal's cheap, so it's cheaper to produce, and therefore it costs less for people like you and me. And I would say if you're efficient with your writing, because 3 marks should take you 3 minutes, it doesn't take 3 minutes to write, 20 words there? So if you are in any doubt whether you've got the 3 marks, see if you can extend it once more. It's like a little safety measure. So mining coal is cheap, less expensive to produce, lower cost to the consumer. You could say something like, therefore, people on lower incomes are able to afford to heat their home. Okay, that would be an extended point, and it just guarantees the 3 marks. That's what we're trying to get here. We're trying to make sure we do that. But in an exam, when you dissect questions, which you'll get practiced at doing, look at the command word. Outline means give reasons. Look at how many things you've got to outline and the marks. Right, I've got to extend one advantage. Then go into it. Make sure you're using those connectives. So I want you to pause the screen and have a go. This is the same question, except it's looking at a disadvantage of coal. It hasn't specified coal because the exam board won't specify coal, because some schools will teach about oil or some will teach about gas. Most will do coal, okay, but it won't say coal. So you need to know that your non-renewable energy resource, the one to use, is coal, and we want you to know how to outline one thing for 3 marks. So pause the screen and take the table of disadvantages, pick one of them and see if you can expand upon it. Pause the screen, do that now, and then I'll reveal an answer that you could have used. Okay, now I'm hoping that your answer, at least if not being the same one, looks like this in terms of the expansion. So firstly, burning coal releases greenhouse gases. I've just picked the first one because I assume most of you probably did. That's worth a mark. That contributes to climate change. Second mark. And climate change can lead to sea level rise. There you go, 3 marks. I've outlined the disadvantage of greenhouse gases by expanding on it and say, well, why greenhouse gas is bad, what can that lead to, etc. Alright, so mark your work, see if you've got that. I imagine most of you probably picked this particular route to go down, but try and get those 3 marks. Rinse that point for all it's worth. Okay, so now we're going to start looking at our renewable energy source, and I think the images and the pictures will tell you we're going to be focusing on wind. Again, Seneca uses wind, the exam board use wind in the books, and the information is more readily available for you. But also, the UK uses wind energy a lot. It's our kind of most favoured energy and renewable energy resource. So some background on wind. I'm not actually going to tell you the background on wind. You're going to need to go onto Office 365 in the Job Logs folder and get the information that I've already provided you. You just need to sort it. So I want you to give me background information about wind, advantages and disadvantages, and then I'll go through to see if you've got the answers right. Okay, so background, advantages, disadvantages, get onto 365, do that, and that'll really test whether you can sort the information into the right categories. Okay, so once you've organised it, get it in your book, stuck in, colour-coded in, whatever, to make sure you've got them. If you want to write them out, fine, and I will go through the answers on the next slides, but I just want to give you the opportunity to work independently without having to listen to me for about 15 minutes. So pause the screen while you do that, please. When you're ready, unpause. Okay, so although this is a bit of a weird order, there we go. This is background to wind energy. So wind energy has become one of the fastest growing renewable resources in the world. 16.5% increase in generating capacity in 2014. and it's about 3% of global energy production. So comparing that to coal, which is 30%, it's got quite a way to go to overtake that. China is the leading wind energy producer. It generates 115 gigawatts per year. That's just quite a lot. Wind turbines have huge blades mounted on a tall tower. The blades are connected to a nacelle or a housing that contains gears linked to a generator. So again, it uses the kinetic energy to drive that generator. And then several wind turbines can be grouped together to form what we call wind farms. Now in the school, we've got a wind turbine, a singular one. But a wind farm, we've got loads off the east coast of the UK. We've got Sheringham Shoal, there's the London Array, huge numbers, because that's a really great place really to implement those wind turbines, because we've got lots of wind and it causes the least disruption on land compared to other methods. So this is your background information. Now your advantages and disadvantages should be here. Now pause the screen just to check that you've got these in the right place, or if it's all wrong and you've given up, just screen print. All right, screen print. This is the given answers. Now you know me better than anything by now. You know that I'm going to ask you to apply this information whenever you get notes given to you. You will have to use them just to make sure that you're not just saying that's very nice, I'm going to stick it in my book and never look at it ever again. So have a little read through these now and take a bit of time just to pause the screen, check your answers or get the information and get it in your notes. In a moment, we're going to use this information. Okay, so pause the screen now, please. Okay, so let's apply this to exam style questions. I'm also not going to give up on varying your exam practice. I'm not going to go on to doing outline ones. I've already given you some information about those today for the coal questions. I'm going to ask you to just go on to a standard explain question. Explain how using coal for energy has positive and negative effects on people and the environment. First off, I'd like you to actually just have a go at answering that question to see if you can do it. See if you can dissect it. I want you to pick it apart and then give it a go. Pause the screen while you do that. This should take you 4 minutes. That's 4 marks, 4 minutes. If it takes you less time, great. If it takes you a bit more because you're practicing, then no problem. But try and aim for about 4 minutes to complete this question. Okay, so the advice I want to give you that helps you dissect this question, if you didn't already, was firstly take the command word. The command word says explain, and it means you've got to use a connective or connectives to extend your answer. So that's the first thing. You need reasons, you must extend them. The next thing though, this question's great because it tells us everything it wants. It gives us a shopping list. We've got to explain how coal, and I know we're not looking at wind, but coal has positive and negative effects on people and the environment. So it wants you to name at least one positive and one negative effect. So if we're having to explain, one of our things we've got to explain is a positive effect of using coal. But we also need to make sure that the explanation is linked to either people or the environment, and you need to cover both. So you might say, I'll do one paragraph or one answer where I identify a positive of coal and I link that positive to how it's good for people. And then I can identify one negative of coal and I'll link that negative to how it affects the environment. So I'm not written this one down, this is just to kind of help guide you through it, and you can read your answer. I would say something like, and I'll be really efficient because I like to be efficient to get the marks, coal is very cheap to mine, that's a positive. This means it's cheaper for the consumer to buy the energy. That is clearly a positive for people. So that is extended an answer, and I've ticked the positive and the people bit. Now I need to make sure what's left. Well, okay, I need a negative and I need it to affect the environment. So, however, coal produces greenhouse gases, which create global warming and climate change. There you go. That's fine. That links to the environment. Or coal produces greenhouse gases, which can affect, coal produces lots of noise in the production, which can scare wildlife and habitats. As long as it links to the environment, then you're fine. Okay, so there we go. That would be a good answer because it gives you that little checklist. If you put loads of really good detail about coal affecting the environment and you'll just focus on the negatives, Or you're positive, it talks about the environment, I don't know how, but you won't get all the marks because it wants specifically positive and negative and people and the environment, all of those things. So to apply your knowledge and your notes, do the same, but instead of coal, you're talking about wind. So how does using wind power for energy have positive and negative effects on people and the environment? Give it a go. Look at what I've just said. Look at the information, the kind of support I've given you for the question above. Apply exactly the same principles. Make sure you're checking off everything in the exam question, and this is just great practice for dissecting those more kind of detailed prescriptive exam questions and practicing extending your answers. Okay, so pause the screen to do that now, please. Okay, so well done. Again, another detailed lesson with lots of information. You've got a really detailed example of coal as a non-renewable source and wind as a renewable source, and you've also got a vast amount of detail about advantages and disadvantages. But not just that, I've taught you how you can apply that information to outline questions and explain questions. It's not out of the ordinary for the exam board to actually use wind and coal, or renewable, non-renewable, in an 8-mark question. So again, the more detail you know about these, the better. And it's worthwhile going over your notes and making sure you're highlighting and picking out a few memorable key stats, facts, figures, just in case it comes up as the 8-marker. Right, thank you very much once again for listening, and I will see you next time for the second lesson on energy resources specifically, and the 6th lesson in the topic as a whole. Cheers, see you next time.